And we know that kids who have experienced that consistent, predictable, responsive, unconditional love and support will then go on and expect that in future relationships. They value themselves, they have secure self-esteem, they can take criticism, they know people care about them, they can stick up for themselves. Like, those are all beautiful skills that we learn in childhood. But if we've missed them, we just need to go back and prioritize, safe attachment figures. And often the teenagers that are really struggling, I'm looking for who are the safe people in their life that can be predictable, responsive, caring, unconditionally loving, all of that stuff.
Our children's mental health are suffering. Even before COVID-19, mental health issues, including anxiety and depression, were already increasing. And now, with cost of living pressures and everything else on top, developmental paediatrician and founder of Guiding Growing Minds, Dr. Billy Garvey, is here today to talk about depression in children. He's recently written a book, 10 Things I Wish You Knew About Your Child's Mental Health. Trigger warning, we will be talking about suicide in this interview as well. Welcome, Dr. Billy.
Hi, Melody. Thanks for talking with me.
Thank you for your time. So, depression. You write in your book that kids who are depressed can be very different to adults who are depressed. In fact, they may not even look depressed. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. We see especially younger kids often won't show us through, being flat or sad, which we might see in older kids like teenagers and definitely in adults. And often they're actually more agitated, and they can be the kids that seem like angry and lashing out, and we think they're just being naughty, but they're actually depressed. So it can be really different to what we kind of expect, depression to look like.
And that sounds a bit, sounds like a challenge then, like trying to figure out, like, when you think you're dealing with a naughty kid and then you realize they're depressed, how do you even get to that point of realizing and discovering that?
Yeah, it's a great point. Obviously, I enjoy doing that because it's so rewarding when we figure it out. But there's always a reason, there's always a reason a child is misbehaving. It's obviously not always depression or even a mental illness, but there's always a reason. And what we're trying to think is, what is the experience this child is having in clinic, and try and think about, what is the world to this little child or this teenager, and what's going on for them. And the trick is, often you can't ask them that, because they can't explain it, which for those adults of us that have had mental illness, it's very difficult to explain it as adults. So when you're a child in primary school or even a teenager, it's really tough to say, oh, it's because I'm depressed. They're just struggling.
So it's about a lot of investigation and trying to have the conversations and figuring it all out in that sense.
Yeah, most of it is kind of, especially with younger kids, speaking to the adults that are around them and supporting them and observing them and saying, how are things going? What's being tough? How long has it been tough for? What else are you seeing? When are the triggers that set this child off? What's changed in the last few months? And, trying then to just think about, what might be the underlying cause why this child is now struggling when they weren't previously.
It's interesting that you said that about having to talk with the adults, because this is an experience that I had with a friend who has what she felt was a depressed kid. He's in his early primary years. He wasn't clinically depressed, but he had lost all his friends when he started a new school year in a completely different class. So he was sad, he was down, and she knew he needed help, but yet it was very difficult for her to find information to help a younger child. She found information for depression in teens, depression in adults, but not younger children. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's really difficult. We're actually, it's a little bit off now, but we have coming, that I was very fortunate to be part of, mental health first aid approaches and curriculum for young kids. That hasn't existed before, but that national body of work is going to be available soon for professionals and parents to access. But it's really, you're correct. It's really hard in young kids. I think we often think it's older teenagers that have mental illness. The reality is that 50% of adult mental illness starts before you're 14. And, a lot of primary school kids have almost exactly the same rate of mental illness as high school kids. It's 14% over a 12-month period. So really, really common. Depression is more common in teenagers, but it still occurs in primary school kids.
Oh, that's terrible. So what type of strategies, simplistically speaking, do you suggest the parents take if they have a depressed child?
Yeah, I think, an important thing is that, being comforting and predictable and supportive and unconditionally loving, and nurturing those kids is really important. I think sometimes we ourselves can get frustrated because we're so connected to them and care so much about them. And sometimes we make the mistake of using a lot of words, either to try and soothe them or to find out what's going on. Like, why don't you care anymore? Why don't you want to go to school? How come you're acting out? How come you're fighting with your sister all the time? And often that will just increase frustration. So trying to, just be comforting and try and help that child calm and show them that all the feelings they're experiencing are valid. And what we're trying to help them do is to learn behaviors that are more healthy when they feel sad or scared or worried or fearful or jealous or frustrated or whatever it is, even if it's not a clinical mental illness. And the beautiful thing of, the reason I do this is because if we can help this process in kids, they'll be really well set up for the challenges of adult life, because there's a lot of us as adults that really struggle with this kind of stuff.
Dr. Billy's book, 10 Things I Wish You Knew About Your Child's Mental Health, has plenty more information and strategies on supporting our children's mental well-being. I'll share links to it in the description. Billy, I'm going to turn on to something a bit more serious here. You make what I feel is a very important point in your book when you say there is a myth that asking people about suicide might put that idea in their minds. So what you're suggesting instead, to put it bluntly, is to address the elephant in the room.
Yeah, we know from national data and research from overseas that most children and teenagers who have been experiencing, including self-harm or suicide, they've been thinking about it very much on their own in a really isolated way for some time before anyone else notices. And that must be really scary for those, kids and teenagers. So what we want to do is, we in clinic ask about it, but we encourage, people when they feel like they have a safe relationship and they're concerned about that, to make sure that they feel comfortable navigating it, but not kind of avoiding those conversations or worried that, they'll put it into their head for a child who's kind of thinking about that, because that's not true. And that's not what we've found in the studies looking at children who are experiencing those awful, feelings. They get really overwhelmed by it. And often the conversation done in the right way can be a really helpful way to take that burden away from them and them feeling like they're just holding that all on their own.
And I guess it's, if you get to that point, it's really important then to have that conversation, but also to draw in probably like a professional in to help with the situation.
Yeah, safety is really important with those children. And that's what we talk about mental health first aid. Mental health first aid is about providing that support and care until a professional such as myself becomes involved or the distress that the child is experiencing is resolved. And so what we try to do is give people the skills to know how to spot that a child is struggling with really difficult emotions and what we can do. How can we approach them? How can we ask about it? How can we make sure that we validate that experience? We don't ask them to explain it. And we also say, I'm here. Another really important thing around kids who are, thinking about ending their life, one of the core symptoms of depression is that we don't promise them we won't tell anyone, and we just keep them safe. We keep them safe until we feel confident that they are around people and getting the support that they need.
It was interesting that your book, so you're talking about the 10 things that we can do, right? And you start off right at the beginning by stating that it's the type of attachment that we have with our children right from when they are babies that actually have a profound impact on their mental health. And it feels like it's boiling down to just letting your children know that you'll be there for them no matter what.
Yeah, it's beautiful, Melody. It's really funny. I started the book on it. I also have a podcast called Pop Culture Parenting, and I think it took me 86 episodes to get to attachment, and I realized I probably should have started there because it's where how we feel about ourselves, and we are social beings, and feeling like we're unconditionally loved and supported and safe and celebrated lays the foundation down. But it's also not set in stone. I think if anyone's listening to this and says, I have postnatal depression, or my family experienced trauma when my little babies were being born or shortly after, and they have insecure attachment and fragility and they don't trust people and things like that, you can earn it back. Relationships through childhood and all of our adult life can be really harmful to our mental health, but there also can be the thing that heals it. Because we are wired to connect with people, and I think when we understand that as caregivers and professionals that care about kids, it gives us a really good goal and priority to really connect and attach with kids, and make sure that they feel safe and valued. And a big part of that is celebrating them and who they are and making them feel like they're really valued.
I really like what you just said just then about the fact that, basically it's not too late. Even if you didn't have the attachment before, you can still form it now.
Yeah, I mean, in 20 years, I've met thousands of children and families, and I've never met someone that that I was like, oh well, it's too late. I give up hope. And I see some of the teenagers that are struggling the most in the clinics that I work in. So, and I've seen the most challenging kids that are lost and agitated with the most antisocial behavior or really destructive mental illness come back. And it's a real privilege to be a part of that. And it should give hope to anyone out there who's really struggling.
That's a really beautiful thought to end with. Did you have any other final thoughts that you wanted to share?
No, it's amazing. Like, things are getting really tough. We're seeing in our community as an increase in presentations to hospitals with mental illness. Our clinic wait lists are getting longer. And I think we need to get better, like you're saying, at sharing information so parents don't feel alone and lost. So, the book and the podcast are attempts at that. But I'm really fortunate that I get to come out in the community and talk to people. So thank you, Melody. It's great to talk to you.
No, thank you so much for your time. As mentioned, you can find out more about Dr. Billy's book, 10 Things I Wish You Knew About Your Child's Mental Health, in the description. And for more information on how to connect and support our children and how to raise happy, healthy children, head on over to our website, momsatatable.com.